So we are recording.
All right. This open meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, and the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the Governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. I hereby call to order the February 25th, 2021 meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee at 6:30 p.m. I am Narissa Wallen, Chair of the Triton Regional School Committee, and I would like to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. So let's play tag. I'm Narissa, and I'm the Chair of the School Committee. Cliff? Oh, did we lose Cliff?
Cliff, and I'm with the Raleigh Board of Selectmen.
Who are you tagging?
Huh?
Who are you tagging?
Who am I tagging?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Pick
Oh,
somebody. Tag somebody to go next.
I'm Brian Forget, and I'm the superintendent of Triton, and I'll tag Larry. Oh, hang on.
Do we lose Larry?
You got to unmute Larry.
Still muted, Larry. Oh, I'm not a host.
It'll be a long meeting.
There it is.
Larry White, Chairman of the Raleigh Finance Committee, and I tag Ronna Lee.
All right.
Hi, Ronnie Ray Parrott, Salisbury Select Board, and I will go with another Salisbury, Linda.
I'm Linda Lukowski, and I'm a school committee member. Caitlin.
Keelan Hunter, school committee member. Maureen.
Maureen Heffernan, school committee, and I will tag Jeff Walker.
Jeff Walker, Select Board, Newbury, and Alicia Greco.
Alicia might be off eating dinner. All right. I think we've lost.
How's Erica's good then?
All right. Like, I'm sorry, but it sounds like one of my kids' toys when the batteries run out.
And I exactly, and
Did she just fall off? I heard somebody.
I'm gonna text.
I'll go. Erica Jacobson, Newbury Finance Committee.
You tag Erica.
I will tag, let's see, Paul Lees.
Paul Lee's school committee, and I will tag Erin.
It's Erin Berger, school committee for Salisbury, and I am going to scroll through and see who I can tag next because I'm not sure who's left.
Kyle. Kim.
Kyle Warren, school business administrator with Triton, and I'll tag Kim.
All right, I just want to say, like, I feel like I'm back in grade school and playing dodgeball, and I was the last person chosen. So, I'm a little teary-eyed up here, folks. All right. I'm Kim Curto, and I was the last person tagged.
We'll try to tag you earlier next time, okay?
That's all right. I'm good.
All right. For this meeting, the Triton School Committee is convening remotely via Zoom using the information posted on the district's website identifying how the public may join. If you're personally attending by video conference using your device's camera, please be aware that others may be able to see you. Committee members and administrators, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the district's website with the agenda posting unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that anything that you broadcast will be captured by the recording. Woo! All right. So We've done welcome and introductions already, dodgeball style. And the next thing on the agenda is reviewing the meeting notes from January 28th. So those were in the packet that was sent out to be by email. Again, we don't need to approve these since they're not official minutes, but if there are any corrections that need to be made, please speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, seeing none. If we can move on to school year update pandemic impact, and I will toss it over to Brian.
Sorry, I was muted. So again, we have a small group, so I don't want to repeat things. So I almost feel like it's more helpful to see if there are questions. So just, by way of recap, we are currently in hybrid. We shifted back to hybrid on January 26th, 7th. So we are currently in hybrid, students, 2 cohorts in Tuesday through Friday. Mondays are largely remote, and then we have high priority students in. So obviously the whole world listened to the governor and commissioner throw down the gauntlet on Tuesday. I can tell you that, or was that Monday? That was Monday. Oh no, that was Tuesday. I forget, whenever it was. So whenever that happened, superintendents were not aware. We got an email a couple hours ahead of that, and then in a conference call with the commissioner yesterday, he felt like he needed to keep that confidential. So there's some stress out there among folks in regards to the planning for this. So I don't think there's anyone that doesn't believe we need to move towards more in-person learning, but the pace and the process and the structure of how we do that needs to be really well thought out and methodical. So there's a lot of details we are still waiting on. I think at this point I can safely say we have more questions than answers. So I don't want to put words in the committee's mouths, but next Wednesday the committee is set to have a discussion. Narissa, Maureen, and I met today in just regards to planning the structure of that meeting and how that will go. So there isn't a plan yet. But the goal will be that meeting next Wednesday, the 3rd, we would come out of that meeting with next steps in regards to a plan to move towards more in-person learning. So, in regards to what it will take to do that, we cannot, without millions of dollars and many new teachers and other educators, this has to be that we're working with the DESE guidelines of 3 to 6 feet. Rather than the 6-foot standard that we've been using all along. So that's obviously the big topic of discussion, but that will be taken up next week. So are there other questions about our model, the plan, the way things are played out?
Brian, real quick.
Of course.
Can you let Alicia in? She's kind of waiting in the waiting room, or Narissa?
I don't have access to do that, I don't think. Yeah,
She,
no.
I am a co-host. She just texted me.
I don't see her though.
I don't see her either.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Tell her
Brian-
we'll watch for her.
Brian, is there any idea when DESE is going to give any sort of guidelines? Has there been any timeline to help bound the conversation?
Yeah. So what the commissioner asked was for the Board of Ed to reconvene and to vote to allow him to determine when hybrid and remote learning won't count. So right now, this is all hypothetical, right? He's been very clear. He wants it in April. The governor wants it in April. There are dates being thrown around, but right now, he's made it clear that he wants it in April, and he's asking the board. What he told superintendents was that he expects that the board will meet within the next 2 weeks. So call that by the 2nd week of March, I would assume at the latest. We would have that information with regard to what the expectation would be. So, we'll move forward with the assumption that it's in April and then likely have to adjust based on what is confirmed from the state.
And this might be what's going to be discussed on Wednesday, but who will lead the charge in the evaluation of different components? Is it the school committee? Is it part of the administration? Does some of it fall under Kyle's role and the money pieces? Like, it feels like there's so many different groups that need to be talking. And since the school committee can't talk public, they can't talk without a public meeting, that it seems like there's a lot of time that's nothing, that there's a perception that nothing's being done.
Yeah.
But it feels like there is stuff being done.
Yeah.
And that you're not unprepared. You're all are on top of this, but there's certain things that can't, like who's who's leading it?
No, it's a great question. And I think that's one of the things we were talking about today was the frustration with the public in general, not understanding how public boards and public
absolutely
convene. So yes, we've absolutely been planning, right? When we planned for full in-person, full remote, and hybrid. So we have all of those models. Of course, they've tweaked over there's Alicia. You letting her in, Marissa? But so they've obviously tweaked over the course of the year. But yes, internally, we have a plan in regards to how we would make this happen. The difference is it's not as to move towards a hybrid or remote model. There are lots of, I don't know what the right word is, atypical components to education, right? Moving back to in-person, this is going back to our wheelhouse, right? So then the way that rolls out is much easier. The question is then, what are the costs? So again, there are costs. The costs will be in regard to, we're actually meeting with the principals. They're refreshing our feasibility studies that we did, the assessments back in the fall in regards to spacing in their buildings. And we're gathering Monday morning to go through that again. But at 3 feet, we're pretty good, right? We're pretty good in classrooms at 3 feet. In the cafeterias where we need to be 6 feet to be maskless. And then I think hallways, just in general in passing, especially with the bigger kids, that's where we need to figure out mitigation strategies or planning on mitigation strategies. So those, I believe, will be within the confines of the funding, ESSER funding that we have. And so those are the plans. And so, yes, that will be part of the discussion next week.
Excellent, because that also brought me to one of my questions that is about next year's budget, but it has to do with this year's budget, which was what happens if we have to, I would love to see the federal funds come through. But I don't think the timing is going to be right to get the federal funds here and in place. So what happens if we have to spend the ESSER 2 funds that we have tentatively earmarked in this tentative budget for the curriculum and some of those other things? What happens to those if we have to spend it to get back in person in the spring?
Good question. So the spending, so you have to think, and you get this, right? Spending for a full year. If we hire a teacher for the full year, it's a full salary and benefits. If we're talking about adding for, call it 2 months, right? The middle of April to the middle of June, that's a fifth of the year, not benefit eligible. So even hiring those replacements that fill in, and it would likely be, the assumption would be we would not have more people moving. We might, but that wouldn't be an outflow of people from the remote academy to full in person. It would likely be some who are in hybrid who say, you know what, I'm good with hybrid, I'm not good with full, I'm going to shift to the full remote academy. So we have the capacity, and I believe we can adjust for the capacity well within the money that we have. So again, we have $854,000 for ESSER 2. This budget assumes 240, right? 240.
That's what,
Yeah, so I mean, there's $600,000 on the table. What we've basically been saying is we want to carry that forward as long as we can, and we can carry that potentially, in early fiscal 23 for the unknowns. So the cost for this spring are going to be a fraction, even if it was fully implementing what we had talked about last summer, is a fraction of what it costed. So we're feeling good and confident, and Kyle can tell me if he disagrees. But we're feeling good about the mitigation for the spring, and the commissioner hasn't said it as a fact, but he has certainly alluded to the fact that we need to continue to plan for all the options in the remote academy through the spring. By September, those options are all off the table.
Okay, that was one of the other questions. I've been doing a lot of myth busting about public meetings myself. And also difference between public school financing and private school financing, and how they can choose to dip into coffers, but we have to stick to our annual budgets. So in those efforts, I've had lots of parents have raised complete questions of, I heard there'll be no remote option if the state says we have to go back this spring. And everyone's pulling out news articles from every which way. But understanding that that remote academy is still an option for our students till this June.
Through this June, absolutely. That will remain confirmed. Remote option remains on the table for the current year.
That's helpful, and I think that'll calm some fears. So,
and I should it's the assumption is that there's a phased approach. He's been very clear about starting with elementary and moving towards middle and high school. Obviously, the high school is the most complex beast in regards to schedules and passing and all of that, the size of the kids, the age of the kids. So that's clearly, it's the priority is starting with the younger and moving to older, but that the phasing would begin in April.
Is there any feasibility, and whether we should push upon the state to ask for, so the pool testing, I saw the survey results, went through those, and we didn't have overwhelming support. And I think that part of that was budgetary, was the fact that, yes, the first month is free at 65,000, but carrying that cost. Is there any part of talking to our state reps and senators that came last night about how do we get that money so that we could do pool testing or another form of surveillance testing to help calm fears? Like, is that anything that's part of consideration?
I've heard, so again, there's the big confusion about the next federal stimulus package, and I think most agree it's a foregone conclusion there will be a next package. We were talking today, all the discussion has been about early on, ESSER 2 was split. I'm sorry, ESSER 1 was split, ESSER 2 went all to the schools, and so ESSER 3, making that up, whatever that next was going to be all to the towns. The most recent information, summaries, does not speak about it that way. That there is money, absolutely large chunks of money allocated to the towns, large chunks of money allocated to LEAs, local education agencies, which Triton is its own entity. So there's been a lot of discussion about that wouldn't it be great for the state to use those funds to implement pool testing, right? Don't pass the buck, right? Set it up, Project Beacon, Ginkgo, whoever it's going to be, partner us with a vendor, say go, and it's not, we don't have to worry about the costs and all of those logistics. We have the program available to us. And if I certainly think the involvement would grow over time. I think people are scared of it. And so when they see that it's literally just a nasal swab, it's not the posterior, I think it would change, but it's moving towards that with, like you said, it's that initial investment that I think is the sticker value, the shock value. So I don't know if any formal plans, no, but I don't know if others, or whoever else has heard that, but I've heard lots of people discussing that as use of those new stimulus funds.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything in addition on that either, but I think, there were two components to that. Part of it was cost, but part of it was that we had basically a third of the student body that was a hard no. I mean, that's a lot of people when you're talking about a pooled surveillance system being successful, and about a quarter of teachers were also a hard no. It wasn't like a, yes, I'll do it if it gets us back more in person. It was a flat out no, like there's no carrot that would lure me over that finish line. And, I would certainly hope too, that if we went that direction, that things would tick up. But I think if there's any investment on our part, we're going to have to do a lot of work to get a bigger buy-in to that prior to starting a program like that. Because even with the portion the state was covering, we don't have the staff locally, right? So we would need to separate from the state's coverage of the test costs, actually source those individuals to run it. So,
I did too. I did just learn that they extended the coverage of that out 2 more weeks. That the state covering that. I believe it's because they have 152, they said, districts and schools. It's certainly not unique districts, so I think their response has been much smaller than they had hoped. So the money's going to go a little further, but it's still open for new participants. But it's so it's up to, I think, April 15th, 14th. Forget the exact.
I've also heard from 2 school committees that they did not start it on their intended date, that there are school committees that have applied and are still waiting to be told that it, when their go date is. So I don't know if that plays into it as well.
Yeah, it has to do with partnership with the Ginkgo, or I'm blanking on the other Beacon.
Project Beacon and CIC Health were the 3.
Yeah. So they set you up with that contract and relationship. So it's a matter of when that gets established.
I thought mine was next week it starts, the pool testing.
Could be.
Oh, at Shore? Yeah. Oh, there are districts that are definitely up and running. But it's once you say yes, it totally depends on when the logistics back and forth, data sharing, all of the logistics getting set up.
Yeah, it was originally supposed to be, I think, the week before February vacation, right, Brian? Was their kind of start?
It was the week before February vacation through March 28th, I believe, was the end. Yeah, it was 6 weeks.
Yeah. So, sorry, I saw Linda had her hand up and then it went back down. I don't know if that, Linda, are you?
No, it was just about the testing. I was more concerned if, even if the state was paying it, if it would be great if all the teachers did it, but what if a large amount of the kids didn't want to do it? It'd be a waste of money to do it for only half the kids that come back.
Do we have any sense of who would get vaccinations? Like,
Can you
if
give me
there's
2
a
seconds? I'm just going to ask Paul because I know Paul has to duck out. So if he has something, I wanted to give him the chance.
Brian, what is the thought process about teachers that don't want to be vaccinated?
Thought process meaning, what do we do? Like, what is our response?
What's the chatter? I mean, what's like the Boston Teachers Union saying about it?
So I don't know. I mean, we surveyed our staff, and I don't have that information in front of me, but the vast majority of folks want to be vaccinated. So I'm still working with a local partner, try and see if we can arrange that. But if people don't want to be vaccinated, obviously we can't require that. But we're moving forward with, hopefully as soon as likely early to mid-March is the assumption at this point, when hopefully working with our partner, we'd be able to be ready to roll and set up in-district clinics for all Triton staff. That would be the goal.
Do we have any plans with the PNN to get together with the union?
Okay, good question. We'll talk about that next Wednesday, but that's a next step in the discussion once we establish our plans and say what we're going to do. Then yes, impact bargaining is required. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in answer to Erica's, I think, original question is that the school committee has to have a formative conversation before we go much farther, because for many reasons, I think, right? It has to be a public conversation in part, but also the school committee still has to vote on the learning model change in the end. So we need to get to a place where or a majority of the committee is comfortable voting yes to get there. And I don't know if that's I don't know what that takes yet, because we haven't had that conversation. So, we need to have that conversation before we go too much farther. Okay. Anything else on pandemic impact update? All right. I don't see any hands. So fiscal 22 state budget from the legislator presentation. So I know some of you were actually on that meeting last night, but I'll just go back through really quickly. I overall thought that their presentation was more favorable than I was expecting it to be. They, talked briefly about Chapter 70 for us. I'm assuming you have them, but but they talked about the UGA increases that the towns were going to see. Two of the things that we kind of focus on is circuit breaker, which is the special education reimbursement. And they seem to think that would be fully funded this year, and that we may in fact actually see some of the additional transportation money that would be new funding coming in. And they also said that they, while regional transportation, which is another one that we kind of see that fluctuates and can help us out, while it's actually $6 million lower than last year right now, that they expect to see that go up through the process as well. They're anticipating completing their budget process in the kind of standard framework. So, you know, as far as the timeline, they were talking about the House taking it up in mid-April and having amendments due the week of April vacation, and then the Senate taking it up the week before Memorial Day, which is roughly what we've seen in the past. So I think that's a, you know, a good thing that we're not going to be hanging out until October, November, December this year until we know what our official revenue numbers actually look like. They are still looking at the Fed again to see if there's going to be some additional funding coming through. They did have to dip into the stabilization fund to actually fund the budget. So possibly they'll be looking at putting some money back into that fund. And the revenue projections are coming in higher than they anticipated for this year. So, you know, I don't think there was anything bad that I heard last night. Let me put it that way. I definitely wasn't hearing the you should prepare for a 20% drop like we were last year. It was very much a kind of positive, like we're headed in a good direction. We expect to see numbers go up rather than down through this process, which was a pleasant change of things to hear. So any questions on that? Again, I know some of you were there for that last night, so. All right, seeing none, moving on to fiscal year 22 district budget development, and I'll hand it back over to Brian.
All right, so again, I think it makes sense to take the same approach. The majority of you around the call here have been part of the past discussions. You have the tentative budget. It was provided to the towns and sent over. So I don't know, unless you would like me to, I feel redundant spending 10 minutes going through the document. I assume there are questions that you have, and we can certainly give you some updates. I mean, I think the important thing is, and we'll provide this to the committee on next Wednesday. It's gonna be a big meeting, budget update and that discussion on the learning model. But providing some updates, because we know there are things that we know since this tentative budget was approved, things that we know we're okay with making some assumption changes. Narissa just mentioned regional transportation and circuit breaker. We didn't include any of the SOA transportation in the circuit breaker. We're going to feel confident now putting some money back in. I think we're going to feel a little more confident putting some regional transportation, upping the assumption there. We know our medical, we had budgeted 5, then it dropped to 2, and it actually came in at 1.18. So there's another, I don't know that number, 50, 60,000 that's going to come off of that. We're working with, we're still with Maya, potentially bundling to put a voluntary vision plan, and it doesn't cost the district anything, but if we get enough people to join, takes another 0.5 point off of that, we're into the 0.75 percentage point increase on the plan. So we are still looking at new revenues or some increased revenues in some areas where there will be decreased expenditures. And so this was the high water mark. And even if all of the positions that are assumed in this were to stay in, I can tell you that figure, the figure that was provided for you as tentative assessments, those figures are coming down. There is another, and we'll talk in more detail with the committee next week. I don't remember if we talked about this with the full committee yet. Please tell me if we didn't, but we now know that we're going to get a premium holiday for our medical insurance. We got a 0.5 month's premium holiday last July. And on our renewal, we're confirmed, and I'm assuming this will be the case for Newbury and Rowley, because you're both with Maya as well. Maya is giving a premium holiday. That's a $400,000 savings. The issue is that's one time. So if we take out those savings out of the budget, we create a hole that needs to be filled back in, and we start with an operating deficit before we start the year. So in our mind, it's not a savings we can take out of the budget, but it's certainly going to be one of the areas that it gives us a little more confidence, because it gives us some buffer in regards to being a little more aggressive on those revenue assumptions, out of district placements that we've been kind of holding on to. We're not sure, get a little more aggressive on our assumptions for those. So all in, it's trending in a positive way since this was approved now 2 weeks ago. So questions?
Looks like Larry has one.
Yes, to start with, in coming up with the budget, were any of the three towns involved as far as the selectmen or the finance committee, or any input from them in developing your budget?
We were working with the information that was given to us, back at the end of January as we've been going through this process. So, yes.
What information given to you are you specifically talking about?
Well, I mean, Rowley had the actual numbers that were given in the meeting, which I watched. So I had those to go off of. I know that I talked to a couple of folks from Newbury to get feedback from them on, because they hadn't had their meeting yet, as you might recall. To get feedback from them, and I know the communication lines haven't been necessarily to me, but they've been open to Salisbury members of the school committee and to Brian on kind of where they're sitting at with their budget.
Okay. I have some questions on page 20. Under items 1000, you're showing a decrease for fiscal year 22 from fiscal year 21. But if you compare fiscal year 20 to 22, there's big increases in like heating fuel going from 396 290 to 375, water going up, all your utilities are going up. And is that due to rate increases, or what's happening there?
I can chime in on that one. So is that the code 4000 operation and maintenance you're looking at on page?
No,
yeah. So in last year's budget, so you hit the nail on the head with part of it. There's we look at the rates every year, and there's variability in those. So that would be your utility line items. But then also with the Pine Grove School coming online, there was an unknown factor there of, with the school, would it be energy efficient? So we had, with those unknowns, we had to, if I remember correctly, have some buffer there so that we wouldn't have significant overages. And then when you look at this year, just as you identified, it was a better case scenario than we anticipated. Those buildings were found to be incredibly efficient. So that's why we were comfortable peeling those numbers back a little bit.
And Kyle, talk about, and I'm forgetting the reasoning. So if you look at heating fuel, for example, if you look at FY 18, 19, 20 actuals, it was 383, 396, and then it dropped to 290, and then back up to 398 and back down to 375. So yep. 20, there was something that falsely deflated those. Was it? Oh, it was because last year. So those are actuals in fiscal 20. So that was basically last February and March and April when our buildings closed down.
Yep. Thank you.
Our buildings were closed from March 13th through the end of the year. And so we had tremendous savings in electricity and heating fuel. It's pretty sad that I actually had to think of that and couldn't remember why. But that's the reason for that dip. So you really have to compare it, Larry, but look back at 18 and 19 to
Okay.
compare that. We're really in line.
All right. Let me move on. If anybody has any questions, let them chime in. Otherwise, I'm gonna keep going. Good. Page 25. If we're looking at Newberry Elementary and the IA, there's a lot of one-to-ones. Now, does the person kind of live with his cohort for the whole school day? You know, is that really one-on-one 100% of the time?
For that, so big answer. A big answer, yes, a one-on-one is one paraprofessional assigned to one student based on a high level of need. At Newberry Elementary, they house the district-wide autism spectrum disorder program. That is a high intensity, a high needs program. So all of those students, and I forget the exact number, I know Dave's not here, 18, 17, it's in the upper teens to 20, around 20 students. I think it's 16, 17, all have a one-to-one. So Newberry's numbers for special education will always look skewed because they're housed at Newberry, they're coded as Newberry staff, but it's technically a district-wide program. Students from Newberry, Rowley, and Salisbury all are in the program at Newberry Elementary School.
Okay, and I can assume that you would be able to identify the IA and who his cohort is for each one of those positions, except for, let's say, floaters or stuff like that. Is that correct?
That we could put a name with each of these?
Yeah.
Yes, it's a spreadsheet and we just don't show you the names. So
Right.
Could we? They are matched up one-to-one.
Legal implications of putting names there.
Exactly.
To make sure that there was some type of document that had that.
So can I just went to that question, Larry? So just to clarify, so it sounds like the question is speaking to, do we have extra positions funded to make sure we have some buffer? So this budget, and tell me if I'm lying, Kyle, this budget funds position for position. And if we have extra, it's included. Kyle could probably tell me the chapter and verse. It's included in a contingency, a salary contingency line at the district level for about 150,000. That's all the surplus salary funding that we have. That's about 0.5% of an over $25 million payroll.
Okay. On page 27, when we're looking at Pine Grove, I noticed that none of the positions were outlined as far as what grades were covered there. I assume you have that information available. We'll say there's 1A sped one-on-one, but you don't know, I don't know what grade they're with or anything like that. Are these floaters or what?
Yeah, that's just we can clarify the grade level. Yeah, so there are some IAs that are not. So if you look at that, the one second up from the bottom under Pine Grove says IA Special Ed Grade 2. That IA is providing general support to Grade 2. So we just have a coding difference. We'll just clean that up so that it has the grade level, or honestly, it doesn't even need to have the grade level. It's a one-to-one. They follow that student throughout the grades. So the grade they're at that year is actually irrelevant. So generally we'll code them as a one-to-one, or if it says IA, special ed grade 1 or grade 2. They're a general grade level supporting more than one student across usually 1 or 2 classrooms at the grade level.
Okay. Now, if this person is shadowing the student, we'll say at grade 4, when the person goes to grade 5, does the student have the same IA or do they get a different IA?
That varies. There are many students who have had the same IA for multiple years. You build a very supportive working relationship. There are some where we partner and they work okay, but we think, okay, let's find a different partnership. And then there are those kids who are wonderful to work with, but have tremendous needs and are just, I mean, it's so much energy, emotional and otherwise, to work with. So those folks, you know, we tend to have an IA work for 1 or 2 years and then give the IA some respite in working with a different level of need. So it varies. It has everything to do with, it's something that not the IAs, but the principals work on every year, and work with all of the staff to pair up and make sure we have the right fit between the student and the individual working with them.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
On page 30, where we're looking at the Triton Regional Middle School, how many sessions are there? Are there like 5 different sessions per school day, or how does that work?
So when you say sections, meaning classes, so there's 5 sections per grade level.
Okay, the first 2 items, English 7-2, English 7-3. I imagine that's the 7th grade, okay, for 2 sessions. And then the second one is the 7th grade for 3 sessions.
Yep. So those 7-2 and 7-3 seems logical. They used to be a 7-1. Those some habits die hard. Those are actually the old teams. So there used to be team 1, 2, and 3 when the middle school was significantly larger. So this right now, we can take those out because there aren't technically teams anymore. They still refer to themselves as teams, and they still label themselves, but there's really no correlation. There's 5 core subjects. So English, math, social studies, science, and foreign language. And those are 4 or 5 core classes that the students take each day. And so the schedule actually aligns with the high school, and they actually mix now. They're not on a team throughout the full day. They actually mix in a more traditional high school schedule. And that allows for other flexibility as well as in regards to electives and other offerings, STEM and other offerings that we offer.
Okay, so it's not a question of, we'll say the English 7-2, that that person is teaching only 2 classes and the next person is teaching only 3 classes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll make a note. Kyle, we'll make a note to just take the teams can still call themselves the teams, but as far as the budget, we'll strip that out because I think that's more confusing than anything else. That is correct. Those are all full-time teachers teaching a full 5 sections.
Right. But I mean, that's why I was questioning that. If they're only teaching, we'll say 2 sessions, why are they full-time? And they're only teaching 3 sessions, why are they at full-time? But you've answered that.
Yes.
Say,
There are no teachers with extra sections floating around where they're getting paid and not working. I can confirm that for you.
Right. Okay. The last 5 items, I assume those are like full-time sessions as well, art, music, drama.
Phys ed and industrial tech. Yeah, so the only one that's not a full-time, as you can see, is drama. That's actually a section, that's actually the high school teacher who comes over to teach the one section.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I've run out of questions, so I'll turn it over to somebody else.
Right. You know where to find us. Marissa, you're muted.
Dang it. It's like my once a night. It always has to happen. Yeah, so if there aren't any more questions, then we have our next budget deliberation on the 3rd, and then we then we'll give direction to the superintendent and the school business administrator to prepare the final budget, which will be out a couple of days in advance of the vote, which will be at our business meeting on the 10th, and then we'll get those final budgets certified and off to the towns following that before the March 15th deadline. So that's the plan as it stands.
I was gonna say, I don't know if you can see, Jeff's got his hands up.
I can now.
All right.
What's up, Jeff?
Real quick, folks, Brian, is the busing situation going to be okay? Is it going to be 3 feet now? And is it going to be workable?
Great question.
You don't have to answer it.
Yeah, thanks. So again, that's another thing we have to talk about with the committee. So our guidelines right now align with, so there's the state guidance, and then there's what we've developed as our plan, and the committee voted that as a plan, so that's policy for the district. So as of right now, and the vast majority of districts are still here waiting for kind of a next review to make a shift. The Department of Ed said, yes, basically, for all intent and purposes, it's 2 kids in a seat again. You can't put 3. We've never put 3 because I don't know if you've been on a bus recently, but unless they're kindergartners, you can't fit three kids in a seat. The buses we run are 77 passenger buses. That's 3 to a seat. So we generally run them with 51 students on a bus. That's every 2 students to a seat and 1 in the magic back seat that we all want when we were kids. So right now it is still 1 student per seat and staggered all the way back. So right now, there are students within 6 feet of one another. They're at like 4 feet. The straight back, the straight across is 6 feet. The one right behind or right in front is generally within 6 feet. The new guidance basically relaxes. You can't put 3 to a seat, but you can basically put back what we had, which was 2 students to a seat. Still have sanitizer, still have masks on, still have windows open. And that's actually an interesting study. Joe Allen, who's from the Chan School of Public Health at Harvard, has now become the guy in talking about facilities and air quality. So our facilities all meet the standards of Mr. Allen, so we can be proud of that. But there's some pretty impressive data in review or studies on the effectiveness of windows being open and what that does for the ACH or the air changes per hour. If you have all the windows on either side open just an inch to an inch and a half on the bus, it could be upwards of 40 to 60 changes an hour, which is the equivalent of being outside. So that means that every minute the air is changing out. So that's the basis of the updated guidance from DESE, is that it's the equivalent of having a mask on and sitting next to someone at 3 feet outside, which we know is very different than being confined in a space inside without any air change. So that is something we have to address. And certainly as we talk about reopening, we would only be able to move towards more in person if we're relaxing that 3 feet, the 6 feet to somewhere between 3 and 6 feet in the classroom. And rough estimate, all of our classrooms can do 3 feet. The majority are more in the 4 to 4.5 to 5 feet. But at the buses, it would be students sitting right by side with one another. So it'll be a matter of, we would have to offer that. And certainly we can, all of the bus runs are running now. They're running on, alternative cohort days. So it would be running with all students riding. I would anticipate, ridership is not real strong this year. I would anticipate that many parents would still continue to drive their students to school. So I don't see that there will be a precipitous impact. by making that change, but there would be a change, and it would require 2 students per seat. So all of these, we have a lot of discussion about, how do I say this? The Department of Ed is not always well connected with the field, as they like to call us. And so there's often implications that we can just do this or we can just do that. In actuality, if we wanted to add more buses, you couldn't find the buses and the drivers, even if we wanted to, right? We could add all these new teachers to add classrooms. We have a hard enough time finding subs, let alone hiring new teachers. So there's a kind of a disconnect between, oh, go ahead and do this, and what actually happens in the real world. So we have to, that's another factor we'll have to play out. But as of right now, we are more restrictive than the state guidelines that were released 3 weeks ago now, 2 weeks ago. So there, and we're understanding there will be new guidance, not sure on what aspects, but my guess is it would be on cafeterias, because that's the problem area for many districts. So my guess is DESE's going to come out with some new guidance on cafeterias that make that less restrictive. But I mean, I can tell you from my personal opinion is we shouldn't be going inside of 6 feet when students are maskless. So we're working on alternatives to make that happen, particularly as the weather gets warmer.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Jeff.
Erica?
I just was wondering, the line item for kindergarten, wondering if you've heard any feedback, positive or negative. I know there was no comment on it on the public hearing last night, but I was just curious if that's even, I applaud it. I think it's a great move. I think my kids will be graduated by the time we hit the totally free, but it's a great step in the right direction. I just did wondering if you had had any pushback or outpouring of support for it one way or another.
I can personally say I've heard nothing but support for it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of questions about kindergarten this year that parents have been voicing online because it was different this current year from in past years, just the way that it was run, and everyone is unsure with the pandemic, like what's going to happen next year. But when they find out that the price quoted on the webpage is not necessarily going to be the price, there is general rejoicing to have that money back in their pockets, because for a lot of families, it's a sizable chunk of change when you're talking about, over this period of a year, how much that's costing them. And I think too, there are a lot of families who simply can't afford it, that have always done half day, and maybe not this year, but when it becomes available at no charge to them, that's going to be a huge bonus to those kids.
I absolutely agree. I think I love seeing that the district's been moving in this direction. So I really want to make sure that that's, I would fight to protect that money and keep it in the budget.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's right. It's an ethical obligation that we have, I would call it.
And I think it benefits our 3 towns. If we're in a community where you offer full day kindergarten, it is a more attractive place to settle a younger family.
Yeah, and there are very few left that are. It was actually funny. So there are very few left that are charging, and a lot of them, after Brian was quoted in the Daily News article, I keep seeing it popping up in other districts that do charge, because we tend to be very similar districts. So I know a lot of those school committee members, and I see them using it essentially as they're talking about those initiatives in their own district, because for a lot of municipalities, there are a lot of regional districts that are left on that list that are still charging for full day kindergarten. Municipalities, a lot of times it's a one-time savings, and they can take that and they can use it to offset that first year and then kind of ease into it. We've never had that capability to do that, right? So other regionals have been looking for an approach that they could take. And I think watching our approach, that's not that one time, like try to swallow it all in one chunk type of thing, where it's spread out over multiple years. Obviously it's not necessarily an easier thing to do, but it's smoother, and it's a very deliberate approach, I think, to addressing that when you don't have that availability of one-time funds.
And if my memory is correct, Brian, you said eventually the state's going to force it anyway. So more than likely.
Say, right, for all the reasons. And then it's, Narissa, it's the ethical thing to do. It's, Erica, it's the right thing for our towns, because we don't want to be, not only, now it's not a matter of saying, hey, come to live in our communities, we have it. It's, oh, we're the only one that doesn't have it. So that's a problem. But then right to your point, Ronnie, yeah, we're much better to be in the driver's seat saying we're going to do this methodically. 75, another 75 next year takes it to 1,000, another 75 in fiscal 23 means that in September of 22, we have universal free full day K. And I don't want to minimize the fact that 75,000 is a hit in the budget in regards to assessments to the towns, but that's palatable versus coming up with $250,000 all at once. So
yeah, I will admit I have not been through all of the bills filed this session yet. There are like 5,800 of them. But last year, I believe there were 3 on making full day kindergarten available at no charge. It's very easy for some legislators to walk in with that and call it a win, right? Because it doesn't harm their communities and it looks really good on their record to have done that. And unfortunately, at this point, we'd be one of the casualties that would get hit. And at this point, if it goes through, even if it's for next year, we're getting hit with 75,000. We're not getting hit with the full 225 that we were facing in the beginning, which is, I think, where it gets like truly devastating, right? That's when it hurts.
Yeah.
So I'm working on those 5,800.
It's okay. You might even celebrate the fact that you haven't read all through those. Just saying, I don't know.
I'll get there eventually. It just hasn't been enough hours in a day right now. There's always interesting things in there.
Yeah.
So, any other questions on the budget? All right. I meant to check before this meeting. I'm not sure if we have another DCC date set up or not. Let me just check my calendar real quick. It does. March. It does not look like we have one set up for March. It's an identical month to February, so we could do the 25th again if that works for folks to come back at that point, and at that point we should have much more solid idea. We'll have guidance from the state. We'll have the Board of Ed should have met. So we'll be able to have updates on at least all of that. The budget will be finalized by that point, so you'll have it at that time. So does that work for everybody? Yeah, seeing lots of nods. All right, so we'll aim for the 25th at 6:30.
And this is the 25th of March.
25th of March, yeah. Right, I'm looking at the right.
Yeah, no, I was scrolling through the calendar and then ended back on April, and I was just making sure that I was in the wrong month.
Fair. All right, excellent. Well, thank you all for your time tonight. And we will meet on the 25th of March at 6:30, and I'll get an email out with that so that everybody who wasn't able to make tonight has that information. And just real quick before we go, I do want to thank Salisbury Board of Selectmen and the Salisbury Town Manager for inviting Salisbury members to visit their Board of Selectmen meeting earlier this week. I know that Brian and I are headed to Rowley at the beginning of next week, and I think Brian, Maureen, and possibly one or more of the Pauls from Newbury will be headed to Newbury Board of Selectmen on the 9th. So we very much appreciate those invitations and that chance to come and provide you a quick update and answer any questions on that. And I guess that will actually be the next time we see most of you, except for Salisbury. We'll see you guys on the 25th of March. So,
we loved having Linda, and we got to have Caitlin come in. That was her first time, and she was scared to death, and we didn't beat her up.
Oh.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I was thankful as well.
Although Linda kept messing with our little keyboard, and then the SCTV guy had to come in and take it away from her. So,
wow, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, all good.
Can I just say, school committee members, nothing but trouble, apparently.
You got it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Thank you for your service too.
Take care.